There is a story I've told on appropriate occasions over the years, most recently at Diocesan Synod this weekend, that bears repeating in the light of today's gospel. For the longer I'm in this business, the truer I know it to be. A young rabbi found a serious problem in his new congregation. During the Friday service, half the congregation stood for the prayers, and the other side remained seated. And each side shouted at the other, insisting that theirs was the true tradition. Nothing the rabbi said or did moved towards solving the impasse. Finally, in desperation, the young rabbi sought out the synagogue's 99-year-old founder. He met the old rabbi in the nursing home and poured out his troubles. "So tell me," he pleaded, "was it the tradition for the congregation to stand during the prayers?" "No," answered the old rabbi. "Ah," responded the younger man, "then it was the tradition to sit during the prayers." "No," answered the old rabbi. "Well," the young rabbi responded, "what we have is complete chaos. Half the people stand and shout, and the other half sit and scream." "Ah," said the old man, "that was the tradition." We can infer from today's reading that conflict in the church may be one of the oldest traditions there as well. The fledgling Matthean community appears to have been struggling with how to resolve differences in a Christian manner. The conflicts must have been threatening enough that Matthew chose to attribute to Jesus the means of suppressing them. Or maybe Jesus did suggest this approach, but not for a church he did not envision or found, but for the community of disciples that traveled with him. However, I have my doubts. What seems more probable to me is that Matthew took a teaching of Jesus about how to treat those we are in conflict with respect, but didn't stop there. He went on to give power to the church leaders to rid themselves of those in their midst who did not conform, or at least to intimidate them into silence. Religion and diversity, this may be a surprise to you, are rarely comfortable with each other. My skepticism that Matthew is reflecting Jesus' approach to conflict is triggered by Jesus himself. Jesus appreciated diversity, as seen in the company he kept, that included tax collectors and Gentiles. His willingness to be a controversial thorn in the side of those who were protectors of religion in his day, and his unwillingness to use power in place of love to transform. I suspect Jesus' willingness to speak truth to power would not be welcomed in most Christian congregations then or now. I can see church wardens, not ours, but others, throughout the ages, following Matthew's approach, taking Jesus aside at morning tea to suggest that his disruptive behavior is unchristian and is not going to be tolerated any longer. Understanding that fear, not hate, is the opposite of love, he would not have been cowed into submission by that conversation. It is likely they would have not been pleased by his loving response. They might have even threatened to call a general meeting of the congregation to censor him, much to Jesus' amusement. In my experience, congregations, and certainly clergy, including yours truly, are not fond of conflict, but you wouldn't know it by our behavior. There is a wonderful Greek word, adiaphora. I just love how it kind of rolls over my tongue. Try it, adiaphora. Adiaphora. Isn't that a nice word? In the Christian context, it means those things not necessary for salvation. Anglicans particularly enjoy fighting over adiaphora, things not necessary for salvation. My favorite example is from the years just prior to the Civil War in America. At their General Convention, Anglicans fought loudly over whether or not it was permissible to put flowers on the altar, while avoiding altogether the debate raging outside the church's stained glass windows over the morality of slavery. I have often wondered, what is the appeal of fighting over adiaphora? After many such battles, I've come to the conclusion that such squabbles channel conflict that is inherent in any relationship or community in a direction that won't fundamentally transform it. In other words, such conflict is the friend of the status quo. They keep us from confronting things that matter in terms of the gospel. During Lynette's and my immersion in grandchildren on our holiday, we heard plenty of squabbles over adiaphora, as you might imagine. Who gets to decide what to watch on TV? What time is bedtime? What fast food restaurant are we going to stop at on a road trip? Whose turn is it to play with Granddad's iPad? None of these squabbles, no matter how they were resolved at the time, changed anything. I know this because the next day, those squabbles were all repeated. But I don't want to pick on kids. Well, in North America, I got to watch up close and personal grown-ups squabble over raising the debt ceiling of the US government. It was a manufactured conflict that had the potential of doing great harm and did do some, but it changed nothing. It was adiaphora. It was a distraction from changing the status quo. No new jobs were created by it. Squabbles over adiaphora make it seem all conflict is bad, something to be avoided. But conflict can be the energy behind creativity, the engine of evolution, the seasoning in human diversity, the propellant to self-understanding. Without it, there would be no peace. Without it, there would be no justice. This weekend, the Auckland Diocese held its annual synod to conduct its business. In recent years, the synod hasn't even summoned up the energy to fight over adiaphora. But this year, thanks in large part to your response to Gino's exclusion from the discernment process, there were 2 resolutions submitted, guaranteed to generate creative conflict. Glenn submitted both, and Margaret Bedgood seconded the first. The first concerned removing sexual orientation and being in a committed same-sex relationship as impediments to the discernment, ordination, and licensing of gay and lesbian members to any lay or ordained offices.